The pub was packed that evening, the air thick with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the hum of casual conversation. It was just another ordinary night, until it wasn't. Suddenly, the doors swung open, and in walked a group of police officers, their presence instantly shifting the atmosphere. Patrons exchanged glances, some stepping aside, others whispering under their breath. The officers scanned the room, then locked eyes on one man sitting at the bar, calmly sipping his drink. Without hesitation, they marched over, barely giving him a chance to react before gripping his arm. "You're coming with us," one of them barked. The man looked up, confused but composed. "On what charge?" he asked, his voice steady. The officers didn't answer. Instead, they tightened their hold and began dragging him toward the door. People in the pub started murmuring, some pulling out their phones, sensing something wasn't right. Then came the moment no one saw coming. Just as the officers pushed him outside, the man turned his head and said 5 words that changed everything. "Check my badge, officer." A brief silence hung in the air as the lead cop hesitated. The others looked at each other confused. One officer reached into the man's pocket, pulled out a wallet, and flipped it open. What they saw next drained the color from their faces. Because the man they had just arrested wasn't an ordinary citizen. He wasn't some suspect on the run. He was one of their own, a high-ranking police captain, and now the tables had turned. So, how did this happen? Was it a case of mistaken identity, or was there something deeper at play? Stay tuned as we uncover the truth behind this shocking arrest. The silence between the officers was almost louder than the commotion in the pub. The lead cop, still gripping the wallet, stared at the badge inside, his face frozen. A police captain. How could this be? The man they had just arrested wasn't resisting. He wasn't panicking. He simply stood there, watching them waiting. The tension in the air was thick. The pub's patrons, still lingering by the windows, whispered among themselves. Some had their phones recording, while others exchanged confused looks. What just happened? Was this a joke, a setup, or something much bigger? One of the officers, a younger recruit, finally spoke. "Captain." His voice was barely above a whisper, his grip on the man's arm loosening. The captain nodded slowly, but his expression gave nothing away. He wasn't angry. He wasn't smug. He was just watching them. The lead officer swallowed hard. This was a nightmare. His team had just arrested a superior in the middle of a public place. But why was the captain here? And why hadn't he identified himself sooner? A mistake like this could cost them their badges, but something still wasn't right. One of the pubgoers, an older man sitting near the bar, finally spoke up. "You boys might want to explain why you're arresting your own captain." His tone was sharp, challenging. The officers didn't respond. The captain took a slow breath, his eyes steady. "That's exactly what I'd like to know," he said, his voice calm but firm. The officers exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. They knew something they weren't saying, and whatever it wasn't over yet. The officers still hadn't let go of the captain, but their grip had loosened, uncertainty creeping in. The lead officer finally found his voice. "We were given orders," he said, carefully choosing his words. His eyes darted around, as if looking for a way out of this mess. "We were just following protocol." The captain raised an eyebrow. "Whose orders?" His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now. He wasn't just curious, he was testing them. The young recruit shifted uncomfortably. He looked at his superior, waiting for guidance, but none came. The lead officer hesitated before answering. "We got an anonymous tip," he said. "A man matching your description was flagged as a suspect." The pub fell silent again. A few people gasped. The old man at the bar scoffed. "You're telling me," he said, shaking his head, "that you arrested a police captain in his own city based on an anonymous tip, without verifying anything?" The officers looked away, clearly realizing how bad this sounded. But the captain wasn't focused on them anymore. He was thinking, connecting dots in his head. Someone had set this up. Someone wanted him humiliated, maybe worse, but why? A woman in the crowd, a bartender who had been watching everything, spoke up. "Captain, I saw them," she said. "About an hour ago. 2 men came in, whispering at the corner table. One of them kept looking at you, like he was waiting for something." The captain turned to her. "What do they look like?" She hesitated. One had a scar on his cheek. The other, I only caught a glimpse, but he had a badge. The captain's jaw tightened. A cop. One of their own was involved, and that changed everything. The captain's mind raced, but his face remained unreadable. A cop. That meant this wasn't just a mistake, it was intentional. Someone had orchestrated this. But who? And more importantly, why? The lead officer was still gripping the wallet, his hands slightly unsteady. "Captain, I don't know what's going on here," he admitted. His tough demeanor was fading, replaced by unease. The weight of the situation was sinking in. They had walked into something much bigger than they realized. The bartender took a step closer. "They left right before you were arrested," she continued, almost like they knew it was coming. The old man at the bar let out a dry laugh. "Sounds like you boys were played." His tone was sharp, but his eyes carried something else, concern. The captain slowly turned back to the officers. "Let me make this clear," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Either you're in on this, or you were set up just like me. So I suggest you start thinking real hard about who sent you." The young recruit's face paled. He looked at his superior, searching for reassurance, but the lead officer was too busy processing everything himself. He pulled out his radio, hesitating before pressing the button. "Dispatch, this is..." He stopped. His eyes flickered with hesitation, then alarm. The captain took a step closer. "What is it?" The officer swallowed hard. "Our radios, they're offline." A cold wave passed through the group. No communication, no backup. It was as if someone had cut them off, isolated them. Then, from outside the pub, the unmistakable sound of car doors slamming shut echoed through the night. Heavy footsteps approached. Not hurried, not reckless, just steady. Whoever had set this up wasn't done yet. The pub went dead silent. The sound of approaching footsteps sent a chill through the air. Whoever was outside wasn't in a rush. They were confident, deliberate. The captain's eyes flickered toward the front entrance, then back to the officers. "You still think this is just a mistake?" he asked, his voice low. The lead officer's grip on the radio tightened. His face was pale now, beads of sweat forming at his temple. "Who else knows you're here, Captain?" he asked, but the captain was already ahead of him. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the bartender. "How many?" She swallowed hard. 3, maybe 4. They didn't look like regulars. They were watching you the whole time. The old man at the bar leaned forward. "Well, whatever they want, they're here now." His tone was almost amused, but his fingers drummed nervously against his glass. A slow creak echoed through the room as the pub door inched open. A shadow stretched across the floor, growing longer as the figure stepped inside. A tall man in a dark jacket, face unreadable. His hands were in his pockets, casual, but too casual. He stopped just inside, eyes scanning a room before locking onto the captain. Then, just as another figure moved in behind him, the lead officer stiffened. His breath hitched. He recognized one of them. The captain caught it instantly. "You know him." It wasn't a question. The officer didn't respond. His silence said enough. The man in the jacket finally spoke. "Quite the scene you've got here, Captain." His voice was smooth, controlled. He took another step forward. "Now, why don't we all have a little chat?" The tension was suffocating. The captain had no doubt, whoever these men were, they weren't just here to talk. The captain didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the man in the dark jacket. The pub was silent, except for the faint hum of the neon signs outside. The officers stood frozen, uncertain whether they were still in control of the situation, or if they ever had been. The man in the jacket smirked. "You make this easy for us, Captain. sitting right out in the open. He gestured lazily around the pub. Didn't even see it coming, did you? The captain exhaled slowly. He wasn't about to let this man dictate the moment. You talk too much, he said flatly. The smirk twitched just for a second, but before the man could respond, the captain moved. In a single precise motion, he grabbed the young recruit's holster, unlatched the gun, and had it in his hands before anyone could react. He wasn't aiming for the man in the jacket, he was aiming past him. A gunshot cracked through the air. The man's smirk vanished as he spun around, just in time to see his own partner, another figure in the doorway, collapse to the ground, clutching his shoulder. The pub erupted into chaos. The officers snapped out of their daze, drawing their weapons, but the captain was already moving. He grabbed the lead officer's radio and twisted a hidden dial beneath the battery cover. A second later, static crackled. Then a voice broke through. Backup was listening the whole time. The signal had been jammed, but the captain knew exactly how to override it. The man in the jacket took a step back, his cool demeanor slipping. You planned this, he muttered. The captain shook his head. No, but I knew someone would come looking for me. He took a step forward. The only question is, who sent you? For the first time, the man hesitated. His confidence wavered just long enough for the lead officer to slap a pair of handcuffs around his wrists. You can tell us downtown, he said. But then came the final twist. As the officers restrained the suspects, the bartender rushed forward, eyes wide. Captain, she gasped. One of them got away. The captain's pulse quickened. Who? She pointed toward the back entrance. The one with the scar. The captain's jaw tightened. The man who had been watching him. The one with a badge. And just like that, he knew this wasn't over. The captain wasted no time. He pushed through the pub's back door, stepping into the cool night air. The alley was empty, too empty. Whoever the scarred man was, he was already gone. The distant sound of an engine revving up sent a chill through him. He had slipped away, but not for long. The lead officer joined him outside, breathing hard. We'll get him, he said, trying to reassure himself as much as the captain. The captain nodded, but his mind was already moving ahead. This wasn't just a setup to embarrass him, it was something bigger. Someone had given those men information, someone with access, and that meant the real threat was still out there. Back inside, the arrested men were being led out in handcuffs. The patrons whispered among themselves, still stunned by what they had witnessed. The bartender locked eyes with the captain. You knew something was off, didn't you? She asked. He exhaled. I had a feeling, he admitted, but I didn't expect it to go this far. The old man at the bar chuckled, raising his glass. Next time, Captain, maybe pick a quieter place for a drink. The captain allowed himself a small smirk. Noted. As the flashing lights of backup units filled the street, the weight of the night settled in. The immediate danger was over, but the real battle had just begun. Somewhere out there, the man with the scar, and whoever he was working for, was still moving. But one thing was certain, the captain wasn't going to let this go. Not now, not ever.